Awesome. So welcome back, everybody. This is our weekly, moving to bi-weekly town hall. Bi-weekly being every 2 weeks, not twice a week. We don't need to argue that, but if you have opinions, you can feel free to put them in Q&A where we will ignore them. So this week we're joined by Emily Austin, as usual. Who will be talking about the threat advisory we didn't release and why we didn't release it. And we will also be joined by Pim Torbach, who heads up our IOC team, and we'll be talking about ways that you, yes, you, can contribute. So with that, Emily, would you like to kick things off?
Yeah, sure. So hey everyone, I'm Emily and I lead the advisory team for the coalition. And if you've followed us for some time, you've probably come to expect our weekly updates that we tend to release on Mondays. And you might have also noticed that this week and last week, we did not release an update. So I want to talk a little bit about why, and also share a little bit about what you can expect from our advisory team in the future. Last week, in light of ongoing protests against police brutality towards Black people in the US and elsewhere, we felt it was prudent that we step back and make space for other voices. We also felt that, quite honestly, nothing we could have reported on would have been nearly as important or as meaningful as those events, and so we chose not to publish. More generally speaking, if you've followed us for some amount of time, you've probably also picked up on a couple of the themes of our reporting. So as we've been following COVID-themed attacks from, early March, we've talked a lot about phishing, how it's the same kind of attacks we've seen for, quite honestly, ages in the community, just rebranded to take advantage of COVID. We've also talked about how the shift to remote work for a lot of folks has opened the door for different types of attacks and vulnerabilities, RDP, and if you're not using it, why don't you close that port and make sure that you're running the most current version of your video conferencing software, those sorts of things. And finally, we've also touched on different ransomware attacks that have targeted various healthcare and research institutions. So all that to say, as we have continued following these events, it's become clear that, especially now, there isn't always something particularly newsworthy each week. One of our data scientists who often contributes to advisories actually reported that his organization only observed 10 domain registrations with coronavirus in them in the last day, and only 2 with COVID, and those were both phishing variants. So this is a radical departure from the roughly 6,000 a day they were seeing, 4 months ago. So taking all of this into consideration, the threat advisory team has decided we're going to shift to publishing on an ad hoc basis. We'll still keep monitoring the news and Slack and other sources of information to try and bring you more useful information and continue to share any newsworthy updates with you. So stick around, don't forget about us. We're not going away, we're just kind of going into maintenance mode. And we'll be back with more news and research for you in the future. So that's all I've got.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Emily. Yeah. And one thing I usually try to add at the top of the show that I forgot this time, turns out taking a week off makes you a little rusty, is if you are watching this and you are somehow not in our Slack, and Martin is going to yell at me for not putting up a slide with the information again, you can join us on Slack. You can follow us on Twitter. You can follow us on LinkedIn. Please do that. It is the only way we can get more people to join us. I usually make a pyramid scheme joke about you having 2 friends join, who have 2 friends join, who have 2 friends join. But if you know someone who could get value or wants to contribute, please, join us. And with that, we will move over to Pim, who's going to talk about our IOC pipeline and, more importantly, how people can contribute directly to our IOC pipeline. Take it away, Pim.
Hi, everyone. My name is Pim. I gave a short snippet into our IOC pipeline about a month and a half ago. Just showed a high-level architecture diagram. And today I will be going over two things. I'll be going over the new and updated architecture diagram, and I will be going over the Slack bot that we are officially releasing. So just some background to who I am. I spend my day job doing malware research. I do a lot of emulation of bots, tracking campaigns, all sorts of scripting to automate malware unpacking and things like that. Now that of course comes with handling lots of IOCs. And at my previous job, I was part of a team that wrote a threat intelligence platform from scratch. So we dealt with a lot of IOCs, and that's kind of how I came to this group as the lead of development for the IOC pipeline. So now I want to go into a little bit of the philosophy about the list that we're providing. So of course, we're providing this list to protect healthcare organizations and hospitals and just any group that's willing to ingest the list from cyber attacks. That's the last thing that people need to be worrying about right now. But if you also think about it from a data science perspective, with all the intel that we're collecting through this pandemic, there's a lot of things that we can learn. For instance, if we start downloading all the malware samples that we're seeing, we start classifying those as e-crime versus APT versus who knows what, and we start mapping out if it's mainly e-crime that's using COVID-19 lures or APT, or kind of what is the balance there? Are people like pushing banking Trojans more? There's a lot of interesting things there that we can see, okay, well, maybe for future pandemics, or hopefully we don't, but you know, helpful anyways for some of these insights. So as I said, I'm going to start with going over the new architecture diagram that we have, and that'll kind of lead into the Slack bot. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. All right. So if you were at the town hall about a month and a half ago when I first shared this design, this is the design that we came up with about 2 days after deciding that we would go with Threat Connect, and it goes from a left to right. And we kind of just planned out a diagram that, well, how do we want to get good intel out to the public? So we had this idea that we take basically as many unvetted IOCs as we can, throw them into Threat Connect. And for those who don't know, Threat Connect is a threat intelligence platform that allows for automation and various enrichments. So we pushed those IOCs into Threat Connect, and then we had this idea of validation services. Now those validation services, the purpose of them is to enrich the IOCs. So let's say you get an IOC from a list, you have no context around it, and then, for instance, if you have a URL, you throw that in VirusTotal. VirusTotal says, 11 out of my 70-something vendors say this is malicious. Cool. We record that in the IOC, and then we pass that to a allow list filter. Now, the allow list filter is there in place so that we can try and reduce the amount of false positives that we get, considering that we're passing this list along with no context and at such a large scale. And we don't know who exactly the audience is. We want to try and make it as clean as possible. So we pass it through the allow list. And now this single egress point that you see here can be thought of as a vetting module or vetting stage. That basically will take the IOC and based off the VirusTotal score, will determine which of these three end states it belongs in. Those are listed as our acceptance criteria. So as our initial proof of concept, we said 10 plus means it's a true positive, 4 to 10 means it requires human validation, and 0 to 4 means it's a false positive. Now, of course, this model isn't too great. Of course, there are things that are malicious that have no detections on VirusTotal. But for our minimum viable product, we really wanted to go with what is going to give us the best bang for our buck, basically. So we developed this out. It took us about 2 weeks, and we quickly realized there were some problems. So Threat Connect has this idea of playbooks. Playbooks are automation that you can create, and the automation can be as simple as you just drag and drop modules and draw arrows between them, or you can write your own custom applications in Python. We had this all developed out in a single playbook that took a single IOC and started up and would process the IOC and do all these steps. Now that caused a bit of an issue because every time you start a playbook, it has to spin up the resources. So if you ever dealt with a AWS Lambda and cold starting, it's the same concept. It's going to take time to start up, and when you're ingesting 10,000 IOCs plus within a couple minutes, it's going to have some serious issues. So we dealt with that pretty quickly realized that that's something that we had to plan for, but we had no good way to do that because the way we developed this, everything was kind of built in this step-by-step phase or platform playbook. So if the initial stage failed, everything else would fail down the line, and just cascading errors everywhere. We didn't really have any design around how we were accepting IOCs. If someone wanted to make changes to how we were vetting, for instance, if they wanted to change the 10 plus to 11 plus, well, they would make a change. Most likely it would cause errors and break the playbook, and then we wouldn't be ingesting any IOCs. And the other issues we had were, since these were all tightly coupled together in a single playbook, only one person could edit them at a time, so development was very slow. And we came to another problem when Cofense donated their intelligence feed to us. Turns out that most of the intel that they pass is not seen in VirusTotal, and it will maybe have 1 or 2 hits in VirusTotal, but not enough to ever make it through our pipeline. So we were taking this really highly curated list of intel, but none of it was making through our endpoint or making it through the list that goes to the website. So we took these issues and came up with a new design. Luckily we got a SME from Threat Connect to help us out and to kind of teach us how the platform works. And we got a developer for Threat Connect who's very knowledgeable and was able to kind of help guide us towards a strong architecture. This is the new diagram that we have. And this is what we have currently, and we're currently very happy with how it works. So just as a quick overview, everything in this big rectangle is a component within Threat Connect. And the diamonds are tags. So Threat Connect allows you to tag IOCs, and then the circles are playbooks. So we really wanted to split it up into as many playbooks as possible. And that's kind of the idea of a monolithic application versus microservices. So we tried to break them out into microservices, so to speak. So just walking through this new diagram, we have our input sources on the left. So we have users submitting IOCs via Slack. We have IOCs we're ingesting from OTX. We have intel from Cofense that we ingest, and then also the Microsoft COVID-19 IOCs that go into their MISP instance. So those all get ingested into this unprocessed IOCs bucket. Now, we really use tags to kind of track the state of IOCs as they're moving through this pipeline. So if we look within, Threat Connect, just as a heads up, this is our dashboard. We'll go over this in a bit, but if we browse our indicators and then look into our intelligence sources, ignoring all the default ones that Threat Connect has, we have our individual communities here. So we have Microsoft COVID, OTX, Slack, and then there is Cofense somewhere in this list as well. And this allows us to kind of track the stages of an IOC, whereas before in this proposed workflow, we had the issue where if an IOC made it to a false positive, we couldn't tell where it came from. So we couldn't say this came from Cofense. They have people daily going in and vetting this intel versus someone's just throwing us like a million IOCs. So that's part of the reason of why we broke it down into communities. And then one of the major updates we made to our design is we changed enrichment to be a on-create event. So before, it was a step-by-step process where as soon as an IOC came in, it would be enriched, and then it would go to a vetting module, and so on and so forth. And that was all managed by a single playbook. Now it's done where every time an IOC gets ingested into Threat Connect under the Slack source, the OTX source, the Microsoft COVID source, or the Cofense source, it will be enriched with virus total. So there's maybe like a second where IOCs live in a state where they are not enriched. So just that alone simplifies a lot of our logic. And we can easily add playbooks to this, right? For right now, we just have virus total, but we can easily add URL scan, domain tools. And this is kind of what we were going for, is a way that we can easily add enrichment, add more services without causing tons of headache. So then once they get enriched, they go under the C19 CTC owner, and they're tagged with the enrich tag. So if we can look at that here. If you see, this is just a random IOC that I pulled up. It is tagged as a false positive, and it is enriched with virus total. So this is kind of at the end of the pipeline, but the enriched playbooks will do things like this. So it'll have a VT score, which is how many vendors marked it as malicious, and then specifically which ones. If we want to say, oh, well, we trust these specific vendors over these, then we can make that delineation there. So then once they're enriched, we have vetting playbooks. So similar as in the previous workflow, but now each one is a separate playbook or instance. So we might have some that are specific to Slack, Cofense, or OTX. Right now, we just have a single one that just checks these same acceptance criteria conditions. If it's 10 plus, it gets marked as vetted. If it's 4 to 10, it gets marked as needs review. And if it's 0 to 4, it's marked as a false positive. Again, these are temporary. These are just for our testing purposes. We can tune these. We have a lot of visibility into how the IOCs are flowing. So we can easily adjust if people start saying, oh, you're not pushing enough IOCs, or you have false positives. We can easily tune that. And then we have a single playbook here that will take all the vetted IOCs, and this runs on a daily timer. So every day it'll find every vetted IOC and push it to OTX. For testing purposes, I've been having it pushed to my personal account just to make sure that things are running smoothly. But you can see here we have, it's a little small, but it says 9,800 URLs in there. And then here we have 9,809. So there is growth there. Runs daily. I think eventually we're going to move this over to the official OTX that gets mirrored onto the web page. And then we'll really start ingesting or start exposing a lot of these curated IOCs. Yeah, so now I think is a good time to transition into the Slack bot. So the Slack bot that we developed, we really wanted to target this needs review section. So you can think of vetted as like a Boolean, like true of this is bad, false positive as being false, this is good. But then there's that gray area where you're like, oh, well, maybe like at one point this was used for malware campaign, or this was used for a phishing site, but now it's down, or just kind of like we can only get so far with automation. So this is kind of where we are trying to crowdsource some of the expertise that we have in this group. Let me pull up the Slack bot. So this is the Slack bot. It is IOC Slack bot, and you're free to send commands to it or do whatever you want. Always good to start with a help command. So it has a couple of features. It has add IOC, which of course will just push the IOC through Threat Connect and add it to this pipeline. And then the only requirement that we have there is that it's surrounded by backticks, and that is to avoid Slack trying to reach out to the site to get a preview. And then we have bulk add, where you're free to add, you just attach a text file and have it new line separated. And then we have a false positive command where you can submit false positives. Of course, with this list, we don't provide context into the URLs per se. So we're really key on making sure that we have as few false positives as possible. So if you ever see one, submit it here and it will get removed from the list. And the new command that our Slackbot developers have been working on is this get new IOC command. So it says it supports URL and hash. It's just URL for now. And kind of the background behind that, I know a couple people have been asking for, well, why don't you expose a hash list? Well, at least with URLs, you kind of have an idea. Like, for instance, I can say, well, this IOC here, I mean, it's pointing to an exe file, might be malware. And this FRE.php, that's a common file name for Lokibot. So like, you kind of have the awareness there of what you're actually blocking. But for hashes, you can't say like, oh, I know this hash, this ties to this specific sample. So before we start exposing hashes, we need to come up with a way to say like, these are the exact things that we're blocking. Like, we're blocking known malware from these specific families, or targeting these things. And just kind of have a discussion there and an agreement with the community about what we are actually going to block. And then we have a check IOCs, which just tells you what tasks have been assigned to you. So the Slackbot will basically, if you execute a get new IOC command, will assign it to you, and then wait for you to submit a final state. So this vetted or unvetted state. So we can test that out here. Nice. Let's just get a couple while we're at it. All right. So we got this IOC. It gives you an ID. So we can go ahead and just throw that up in VirusTotal. VirusTotal says, okay, it was found as malicious, malicious, malicious. Throw it in URL scan. See if that resolves anytime soon. Okay, that might take a sec. But if we look within Threat Connect, there's our IOC that was assigned, and it's tagged as the needs review, and it has a VT score of 6. So there is a little bit of a, if you can count this is 7, and that's 6. So there's a little bit of, we have to figure out what's going on there. But there's the metadata, and then let's see if this came back with anything. Well, considering that it's FRE.php, I'm going to go ahead and mark that. And that's a common file name for Lokibot. I'm going to go ahead and pass that as vetted. So with the submit IOC command, you can do that. So submit IOC, and then the ID. Gives you a nice thank you message. If you go back in Threat Connect and refresh the page, the IOC is now marked as vetted. So this is how users in the group can go and actually help us whittle down this queue. As I kind of alluded to earlier, we have dashboards to kind of show all the intel that we're gathering. So on the left here, this is the total amount of ingested IOCs. On the bottom is all of our specific sources, and then how many IOCs we've created over time. And this is kind of our queuing system. So we have 9,000 URLs that are marked as vetted, 82 that are marked as false positives, and 2,000 that need to be reviewed. And if I remember correctly, we have about 4,000 members in the group. So if every single person in the group would just get a single IOC to evaluate, half of them wouldn't even have to do it, and we could get through this within a day. Now, of course, that's not going to happen, but we have so many people in the group that we can really start making a difference here and really start pushing out some good intel. And the one nice thing about, or another nice thing about Threat Connect is I can create as many read-only accounts as possible. So if anyone would like an account to monitor how our pipeline's doing, to see why we are actually blocking the IOCs that go into the block list, I'm happy to create you an account. You can go and inspect and do whatever you like. So to summarize what has been done, we have a Slack bot now. That is, I encourage you all to take a look at it, test it out, like try and find bugs, do whatever. Just start submitting results for IOCs. And we can also implement systems where if someone has malicious intent and they start submitting incorrect resolutions for all these IOCs, we can actually go and track them back and say, you submitted like 100 IOCs, they're all incorrect. We're going to block you from doing that. And we can also start doing a leaderboard system where if people where if people are really starting to submit a lot and really get behind this cause, we can then do a weekly shout out of like, here are the top 5 people who reviewed IOCs. So new features. So we have all the Slackbot commands, and with the new architecture diagram, with the new architecture that we have in place, we can easily add more sources. So if any of you have sources that you would like us to add, we can easily do that. For enrichment, we have virus total for now, but happy to take more services there as well and start expanding this out. Again, like a lot of this is all about protecting healthcare organizations and organizations in general and people from cyber attacks. But it also comes from the fact afterwards that we want to be able to analyze this data and really take it as like what happened during COVID-19 with cybercrime? Like what were people doing? Who were they targeting? Why were they targeting them? So we want to start generating as much intel as possible, even if we don't start pushing out that intel to block. Maybe we can say, like, if we start ingesting all email addresses that come in. We do have email addresses coming in, but they're kind of hard to vet. There's not many services that can do that. So even if we just keep it for data science purpose afterwards, I think that's a great use of all this data. So next steps, we want to just add more enrichment, add more sources, add more data types, start downloading samples, tune our acceptance criteria, and keep fixing bugs if people find them. So if there are any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Oh, yes. Yes. And that was beyond fascinating. Thank you very much. I'm very interested in this. Yes. And Nathan said amazing, not just fascinating, but amazing as well. And I completely agree. This was awesome, awesome work. And we do have some questions from the audience here. It's just not me blustering on. Eileen would like to know if you are willing to share your updated architecture diagram that we are seeing here. And if possible, she'd also love to see one of your playbooks because she's working on developing something herself. And she would love to use your example to use as an example. And so she's wondering if you are able to hook her up. And if not, understood.
Yeah, definitely. We can definitely do that. Playbooks can be exported within Threat Connect. So if you are looking to just mirror what we have within Threat Connect, I can export those and give those to you. The Slackbot is also open source. So if anyone would like a good kind of base for a Slackbot, this could work for your organization. And I will find a link for that after this.
Yes, and I agree with Eileen's last statement saying, hey, if we can't be honest and leverage each other's work, what's the point? I think she's absolutely right. We're exactly here to spread the love and to defend hospitals, so why not? And all of that. Eileen, I see your email there. I will make sure that it gets to the right place for you. We also have another question from an anonymous attendee that says, can or should we as reviewers independently from third-party scanners vet something as malicious? For example, a phishing page that hasn't been listed yet, but we can directly see it's phishing. Or another example, we know it's malicious code anecdotally, but it's still not listed.
So if it's not within our data set, I mean, it would be submitted through our system. And that's kind of the reason why we have multiple vetting rule sets. We can say, for instance, if our Slack community is giving us really high quality IOCs, we can lower the bar and say, if it has one detection in virus total, then go ahead and push it. Now, that's the nice thing about being able to tune those.
Very cool. And real quick, from what I understand too, we are getting something like 100 million plus IOCs a day, thanks to the fire hose from the various donors. Is that?
Yes. So we have this is the public system where we have a good amount of our standard vendor feeds, and then we have some behind the scenes feeds that we are not able to process within Threat Connect, but they are going through the same exact process and acceptance criteria.
Gotcha. And if people want to sign up, or obviously they're in our Slack and we've put that out there, all they've got to do is basically send a DM to IOC Slackbot and they can get rolling.
Yep. It's just issue a single help command. Everyone should be set up to get started. Again, just type help, get new IOC URL, and start analyzing things.
Right on.
Yeah.
And the another good thing here is that since these are marked as needs review, that means at least a couple AV vendors are marking them as malicious. So there's not any risk of like something wildly, like there's no way like a google.com is going to make it in here and someone marks it as unvetted or false positive.
So data mining doesn't count then as malicious. No, I'm kidding. All right. Anyway, I joke. If Google's listening, and they always are, I apologize. All right. So
really doubling down on that one, Nick.
there it is. There it is. Well, that's all the questions we have. So I will turn it back to Eric, and thank you, Pim. That was awesome.
Of course.
Yeah, that was great. So thank you, Pim. Thank you, Emily. Thank you, Nick. As always. Yeah, I know we don't have as many attendees as we would like to have, which is, what are we licensed for, 500? That's how many we would like to have every week. But if you're here, thank you so much for watching. If you're watching on YouTube, thank you so much for watching. If you are contributing IOCs, thank you for contributing IOCs. Please vet IOCs. If this, like I will spend Erick's, I'll spend my money to buy t-shirts for people if like this becomes a real thing. I don't know. Everyone likes free t-shirts, right? We'll figure something out. We'll figure out like a reward system for people who are like really killing it on IOCs. Beyond that, I think that, yeah, please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe if you're watching this on YouTube. If you're watching this live, I don't know, follow us on Slack, retweet our stuff, follow us on Twitter, join us on Slack, retweet our stuff. Nick is finally, when Martin watches this in like 6 hours, this is for you. If you're watching this on YouTube and you want that direct link, you have to follow us on Twitter first. And there's a link in the tweet. So yeah, thank you all for joining us. I really appreciate your time. We have 2 more questions. No, none of these are questions, but thank you, Greg. I really appreciate that. Yes, please help us vet IOCs. That's huge for us. Yeah, thank you everyone, and have a wonderful day.
Thanks everyone.
Thanks.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.